Well, we welcome Andrew Griffith, Cabinet Minister, Economic Secretary to the Treasury. Good morning. Thank you for joining us this morning. I want to start by talking to you about the latest developments in this Middle Eastern conflict, with President Biden due to fly in, the Jordanians cancelling their meeting with him, and now questions over who was responsible for that strike on a hospital which has killed hundreds of civilians. What's your reading of the situation this morning?
Well, the destruction of the Al-Ari hospital is devastating, and all of our thoughts go out to everybody who's been affected, all of the innocent civilians on both sides of this conflict. And the the government's priority has always been the protection of civilian life. We'll work with allies to try and get to the bottom of what happened. More generally, we're supporting diplomatic efforts across the region to try and prevent escalation, to bring peace and to minimise life. And that includes the humanitarian support that the Prime Minister announced earlier this week for the people of Gaza.
Much speculation as to whether or not the Prime Minister will follow in the President of the United States' footsteps and visit Israel this week. Can you give any clear line on whether or not that's going to happen, on whether or not a decision has been made?
I can't add anything to the speculation, but I can confirm the Prime Minister has been at the heart of diplomatic efforts. He's spoken to the leaders of both the Gaza itself, of Egypt, of the King of Jordan, and of course staying very closely in touch with our international allies. So there's a lot that the Prime Minister and the UK is doing already in this space.
Yeah, it certainly feels as though this conflict is on a knife edge in the wake of this strike on a hospital. We've heard, whilst you've been on air with other broadcasters this morning, from the Israeli Defence Force robustly denying their involvement, pointing to what they described a professional review and aerial imagery. Meanwhile, Hamas and the Palestinian Health Authority adamant that it was not them. What role will British intelligence play in trying to establish the facts in all of this? Because, of course, from those involved directly in the war, quite often it's impossible to rely on any intelligence that they offer to the media.
Yeah, it's important that in time, and I'm sure it will take time, that facts come out. We must remember that the Israeli army is a professional, uniformed army. It's under civilian and democratic control. Hamas is a terrorist, and Islamic Jihad are both prescribed terrorist organisations. So we've got to be very careful in both our language and how we frame these things. If the UK has intelligence assets that it can put to work, we will do so. And it's right that everyone tries to get to the bottom of this, which is, of course, just one part of human suffering that took place ever since the invasion and the abductions that we saw in Israel last week.
Just to read between the lines there on your description of, on the one side, terrorist organisations saying what happened, and on the other, a democratic country saying what happened, should we take from that the view of the British government is we should be more likely to trust the Israelis than those in Gaza?
No, we should be careful in our language and careful, in how some people draw equivalence. It's right to follow the facts. Let's get to the bottom of that. And it's also right, and the UK's position is always that international law and humanitarian considerations are incredibly important. That's one of the core roles of the UK in this rules-based order, in upholding international law. So we should just be careful about our language. It's a time for people to be responsible and to support all of the diplomatic efforts that are strenuously going on, to minimise loss of any human life on either side of this conflict.
OK, I want to ask you some questions now in your capacity as Economic Secretary to the Treasury. The figures released by the Office for National Statistics this morning saw that inflation remained at 6.7%. A bit of a blow for the government?
Well, we always said it would be challenging. It's an ambitious target, but it's absolutely the right priority to have. Inflation robs people of their purchasing power, the value of their savings. And so in a world where governments have to make difficult choices, prioritising the fight to halve inflation this year was the right one. This is broadly in line with expectations. So, there's still a quarter left to go. We will see some of the benefits of continued reduction in energy prices. And one of the figures that we saw in the subtext of what came out today, where inflation was flat for the month of September, is that food inflation fell by a percentage point. And that's valuable because that's what speaks to people's shopping baskets at the end of the week or month.
What do you say to those who say that inflation in the United States is considerably lower than it in the United Kingdom? Even in the Eurozone now, inflation lower than in the United Kingdom. The Labour Party saying this morning that next year the UK is expected to have one of the highest levels of inflation of any major advanced economy.
Well, I'm taking no lessons from the Labour Party. Their plans to borrow an additional £28 billion a year is precisely what would keep interest rates and inflation higher for longer and undo all of the good work that we've done, which still offers the prospect of achieving our target to halve inflation this year. In terms of general economies, we're broadly in the middle of the pack on most metrics with most other big Western G7 economies. Of course, in the UK, we protected households to a larger extent than in the US. We helped people more with their energy bills. We helped more people during COVID. And we're paying some of the price of that. But it was the right decision that we took to protect people then. And it's why we continue to make difficult but responsible decisions to bear down on inflation. That plan is working, as shown by today's figure, but there is still more to do.
Andrew Griffith, is that you saying that the Prime Minister, then the Chancellor, his decision to go so large with the furlough package, with the emergency COVID loans, with all of that, much, much more spending by the British state than comparatively happened in the United States, are you saying that's partly to blame for our higher inflation today?
The level of our borrowing is one of the reasons why we're having to make difficult but responsible decisions and why we're having to work very hard to bear down on inflation. But those were the right decisions at the time. And we protected people. We gave them very significant help, things like the very successful furlough scheme that helped employment and protect businesses and reduce some of the scarring that we would otherwise have seen.
OK, Andrew Griffith, Economic Secretary to the Treasury, thank you very much indeed for your time this morning.